I have taught comparative xenobiology at the Academy on Silun for 61 years, and in all that time, I had never once been frightened of a student. I had been frightened by a few here and there. There was the Vorth who grew a second mouth halfway through my course and in a moment of distraction ate my lectern. There was the gas being who kept forgetting to stay corporeal and drifted, in the middle of a final examination, straight up into the ventilation, and we spent 2 days coaxing it back out of the building's recyclers. These things happen at an institution that admits 1,000 species. You learn to keep a spare lectern. But frightened of a student, no, never. Students are small and soft and uncertain. They come to a classroom to learn, and I am the one who already knows, and that is the natural order of a classroom. It is, perhaps, the only thing in my long, careful life I never thought to question. The teacher knows, the student learns, the world turns. Then the humans enrolled, and I learned that the natural order of a classroom is a thing that can be ended in a single afternoon, with a single sentence, spoken so quietly from the back row that I almost did not hear it over the hum of the containment fields. I want to tell you about that afternoon. About the plant and the professor, that was me, and the human who looked at a thing that has killed every species that has ever touched it, a thing my entire civilization had declared undefeatable, and asked, very calmly, with a napkin already tied around her neck, if someone would pass the seasoning. It has been 4 years. I still don't have my appetite all the way back. Let me try to explain why. You have to understand the Academy first, the kind of place it is, the kind of world it sits on, because it makes everything that happens stranger, and it makes my own failure easier to forgive or harder. I've never decided which. Silun is a teaching world, not a world with universities on it, a world that is a university, more or less, top to bottom. Green and mild and endlessly quiet, wrapped in a soft, temperate climate that never does anything dramatic, ringed with orbital lecture stations that drift across the night sky like slow, bright beads. The cities are built low and full of gardens, deliberately, so that students from 1,000 different worlds can each find some corner that suits their particular biology. A misted grove for the amphibious ones, a sun-baked terrace for the silicon-based, a dim, cool reading hall for cautious, dim-loving people like mine. It is, I say this without exaggeration, the most peaceful place in the known galaxy. We have made peacefulness into an art, and then into an institution. The most dangerous thing that happens on Silun in a normal year is a disagreement about grades. Occasionally a heated one. We are proud of this. We are a world of careful minds doing careful work, and we do not, as a matter of deep cultural principle, have incidents. When other worlds have wars, we have symposia. When other worlds have disasters, we have, at worst, a scheduling conflict. I had lived 61 years inside that peacefulness, and I had come to believe, the way you believe in gravity, that it was simply how civilized existence worked. My particular corner of all this was the Xenobotanical Hall, a long, high-ceilinged building full of soft northern light, where I kept the most complete collection of dangerous flora in the entire sector. Behind glass, behind containment fields, behind every safety measure that 6 different species of extremely cautious scholar could devise across 3 centuries of refinement. I had spent my whole life cataloging the ways the galaxy's plants can kill you, and there are a great many ways, more than you would ever want to know, a whole grim garden of them, and I knew them all. Every one. I was, if you will forgive an old being a little pride at the end of his career, the foremost living authority on lethal botany in known space. 40,000 specimens, every single one of them deadly. Every single one, I believed, properly catalogued, properly understood, and above all properly feared. I am a Silanti, by the way. I should say so since you can't see me, and it matters to the story. We are a slight people, tall and thin and gray-green, with long, delicate fingers built over 1,000,000 years for fine, careful work, and large, dark eyes built for reading in the dim. We are not warriors. We have never once been warriors, not in all our history. The concept sits strangely in our mouths even as a word. We are scholars and gardeners and archivists and careful, careful people, and we are careful for a very good reason. We are also extraordinarily easy to kill. A silent body is a fragile thing. We die of toxins that other species shrug off. We die of impacts that wouldn't bruise a human. We die, the students like to joke, of a sufficiently harsh word, and it isn't really a joke, not entirely. Our hearts are delicate in more ways than one. So I am, by my very nature and the deep grain of my species, a frightened sort of creature, cautious to my bones, measured in everything. I had kept myself alive for 61 years inside a building full of poison by the simple, iron method of never, ever, under any circumstances, taking a single thing for granted. Caution was not a habit for me. It was a faith. And then the human walked into my classroom and took everything for granted all at once, casually, cheerfully, and somehow lived. And took my faith apart in an afternoon, the way you'd take apart a flower to see how it was made. There were a handful of humans in that year's intake, 3 in my particular class. I had read about their species, of course. By then, every xenobiologist in the sector had, and the reading was strange enough that it stuck with you. Humans came from a world that was, by every galactic standard we had, aggressively hostile to life. Not hostile the way a barren rock is hostile the way a predator is hostile. Their homeworld's atmosphere was a slow, corrosive poison of reactive oxygen, the kind of gas that other species use to sterilize equipment, and humans simply breathed it all day, every day, and had built their entire metabolism around the abuse. The native plants there, the reports said, manufactured toxins not for any clear evolutionary reason, but seemingly out of sheer competitive spite, whole forests of things that could drop a grown creature where it stood. The animals had teeth and claws and venom, and a frightening inventiveness about using all three. And the weather alone, on the human homeworld, killed thousands of them every single year, with storms and floods and freezes and fires, a planet that seemed to actively rotate through its various methods of murder by season. And humanity had not merely survived this nightmare. That was the part that made the reports read like folklore. They had, it was said, eaten their way through it. Faced with a world where nearly everything was poison, they had not retreated and they had not died out. They had rolled up their sleeves and got to work on the poison. They had taken toxic plants and bred the toxin down over 1,000 generations. They had taken poisons that couldn't be bred out and learned to cook them out, to boil and leach and ferment and char the death right off of them. They had built, the reports claimed, an entire civilization, an entire culture around the single relentless question, can I eat this? It was a question most species ask perhaps once in their history, very carefully in a sealed laboratory, and answer with a firm and permanent no. Humans, apparently, asked it constantly, everywhere, with great enthusiasm and a frankly disturbing rate of success. I will be honest with you, because honesty is the only thing that makes this story worth telling. I did not fully believe it. The reports read like tall tales, like the things that grow in the retelling between one world and the next. They ate the death world. I assumed the truth was more modest, the way the truth almost always is, and that some xenographer with a taste for drama had inflated a few sensible facts into a legend. I filed humanity under interesting, probably exaggerated, and thought no more about it. The human in my class was called Mara. She sat near the back by the window. She was unremarkable to look at least to my eye, small like all of them, soft with that particular restless human energy that makes them tap their fingers against the desk and shift in their seats and let their eyes rove constantly around a room, touching everything, never quite still. She was a good student, a very good one actually. She asked questions that were sharper than her year mates, questions that occasionally made me stop and think, which a student had not done to me in a long while. And she had one habit that I found odd at the time, and that I now understand completely. Every time I brought out a new specimen, every single time I described to the class what some new plant did to a living body, the swelling, the seizing, the slow stopping of the heart, Mara would lean forward just slightly, and a particular expression would cross her face. At the time I read it as fascination, scholarly hunger, the good and proper appetite of a bright young mind for knowledge. I had the right word, appetite. I had simply attached it to the wrong thing. It was not knowledge she was hungry for, leaning forward at the description of each new poison. It was lunch. The afternoon it happened, I had brought out the Maw-Lily. I have to tell you about the Maw-Lily properly, slowly, the way it deserves, so that you can feel the full weight of what came after, because if you don't understand what this plant is, then you cannot understand what Mara did, or what it cost me to watch her do it. It is, by every measure I have ever known, the single most lethal plant in my collection, which is to say, the most lethal catalogued plant in the known galaxy. It grows in only one place, a small dead moon called Esketh, in soil that is, quite literally, powdered bone, the remains of whatever once lived there before the Maw-Lily inherited the place. And it is beautiful. That is the cruelest part of it, the part I always lingered on in the lecture. A pale, soft, faintly luminous bloom, the warm color of old ivory, that seems to hold a light of its own in the dimness. And it gives off a scent, a delicate, sweet drifting scent that carries far further than a bloom that size has any right to project, a scent that creatures across a dozen worlds have described, in their final living moments, as the loveliest thing they ever smelled. That scent is the first weapon and the only one it ever needs. It is an attractant, it wants to be smelled. It has evolved over uncountable years to be irresistible, and it is laced with a neurotoxin so refined, so impossibly surgical, that a single breath of it at close range begins shutting a body down in seconds. Not minutes, seconds. And the toxin does not bother with pain, which somehow makes it worse. It is too elegant for anything as crude as agony. It simply walks into the nervous system like it owns the place and begins switching things off, one by one, calmly, methodically, sensation, then movement, then breath, then heart. And by the time the victim understands what the lovely smell has done to them, they are already most of the way gone, and there is nothing in them left to be afraid with. I had logged 41 deaths to the Maw-Lily over the course of my career. 41. I want you to sit with that number because I had sat with it for decades. They were not careless people, the 41. They were researchers, almost all of them careful, educated, cautious people who knew exactly what the Maw-Lily was, who respected it utterly, who took every precaution their species could imagine. And they died anyway, because the margin for error with the Maw-Lily is not small. It is not even thin. It does not exist. There is no first mistake to learn from. The first mistake is the last one. So I kept it behind triple containment. A sealed case, within a stasis field, within a dedicated ventilation system that scrubbed the surrounding air 100 times each second, primed to flood the room with neutralizing agent at the first molecule of escaped scent. When I brought it out for a class at all, which I did once a year, as the centerpiece of my most important lecture, I wore full breathing apparatus and gloves to the elbow, and I did not, under any circumstances, open the case. The students viewed it through the glass. That was the entire lesson, most years. Here is the most dangerous, most beautiful thing in the galaxy. You will look at it through glass, and you will be deeply grateful for the glass, and you will carry that gratitude with you into every field you ever study. I set the case on the lectern. I gave my lecture, the one I had given for 40 years, with the same careful weight on the same careful words. And I watched the usual ripple of unease move through the rows, the proper, sensible fear of proper, sensible students, looking at a thing that could kill every one of them in the time it takes to gasp, if the glass between them and it should ever fail. This, I said, in the low and measured voice I had used for this exact moment across 4 decades, is the Maw-Lily of Esketh. It is the most lethal plant known to science. Its scent alone, not its touch, not its taste, its scent inhaled at close range, will kill a being of average mass in under 10 seconds. There is no antitoxin. There has never been an antitoxin. There is no treatment, no field remedy, no clever trick of chemistry that has ever worked, and not for lack of trying. There is, in any practical sense, simply no surviving it. I let that settle over the silent room. 41 researchers have died learning this lesson. I knew several of them. They were careful people. They were cautious people. They were, many of them, far cleverer than you, and they are dead. I tapped the glass once gently. You will not become the 42nd. And you will not become the 42nd because you are going to do the single intelligent thing that any thinking creature can do when confronted with the Maw-Lily. You are going to keep it behind this glass, and you are going to leave it alone. Forever. The room was silent, properly deeply silent. The good and respectful silence of young people who have just understood, all at once, that they are looking directly at death, and that only a pane of glass is in the way. And then from the back by the window, Mara raised her hand. "Professor," she said, "quick question. Is it the scent that's toxic or the plant itself?" A fair question. A good one, even sharper than most. I answered it the way I would answer any bright student who'd been paying attention. "The scent is the delivery mechanism," I said. "An aerosolized neurotoxin produced and released by the bloom. The plant's own tissues contain the same toxin in concentrated form, far more concentrated in fact, but the danger to most species is overwhelmingly the scent, precisely because it acts so quickly and at such a distance. By the time you were close enough to touch the tissue, the scent would already have killed you several times over." I paused. "Why do you ask?" She tilted her head a little. That small human gesture. "So if you neutralize the toxin somehow, heat, maybe, or some kind of reaction, would the tissue still be dangerous? Or is the toxin really the whole problem? Like, is there anything else wrong with it, or is it just the poison?" I felt the first faint stirring of something I could not yet name. A small cold draft, somewhere at the back of my mind. "The toxin is the whole problem," I said slowly now. "There is nothing else wrong with the Maw-Lily. Its tissues are, chemically, otherwise unremarkable. But Mara, it is also not a thing that one neutralizes. I want to be very clear about that, because the way you phrased it suggests you think there might be a method. There is not. The Maw-Lily toxin is among the most stable organic compounds ever discovered by any species anywhere. Heat does not break it down. We have applied temperatures that would vaporize steel. Acid does not break it. Time does not break it. Samples centuries old remain fully lethal. 41 people have, in a manner of speaking, tested its stability with their lives. The Maw-Lily does not have a weakness. The absence of a weakness is the entire reason it is the Maw-Lily, and not simply another dangerous flower. "Everything has a weakness," Mara said. And she didn't say it as a challenge. That was the thing that unsettled me far more than defiance would have. She said it the way you'd remark on the weather. Mild, certain, almost gentle. A small plain fact that she happened to know and that I happened, in her view, to have somehow missed. And around her I saw the other 2 human students go very still. There were 3 of them in that class, as I said. And the other 2, I would learn their names soon enough, Tev and Okonkwo, went still in a particular way. Not surprised, not even alarmed exactly. Resigned. It was the specific, weary stillness of people who have watched a friend get a certain kind of look in her eye before, on other worlds, in other classrooms, and who know with grim precision exactly where that look leads. Mara, the younger of them, said very quietly, "No." "I'm just asking questions, Tev," Mara said, without turning around. "You are never just asking questions." I should have ended the lesson right there. I want that recorded, for whatever small dignity it preserves. Every one of my 61 years of caution was standing up inside me at once, shouting at me to seal the Maw-Lily back into its vault, dismiss the class, and never let this particular conversation continue for one more sentence. That cold draft at the back of my mind had become a wind. But I was a teacher, and a teacher's curiosity is a kind of chronic, incurable disease, the same disease, I think now, that lives in every true scholar of every species, the thing that had made me spend my whole life in a building full of poison in the first place. And a small, foolish, fatal part of me wanted to know what this strange creature from the death world was actually thinking. What she saw, looking at my Maw-Lily, that I did not. "And what," I said, against every instinct I had, "would you propose to do about its weakness, Mara, if, for the sake of argument, it had one?" She looked at the Maw-Lily for a long moment through the glass, and that expression crossed her face again. The leaning forward look, the hungry look. Except now, watching her, I finally understood that it was not the look of a scholar studying a specimen at all. It was the look of a cook studying an ingredient. "Where I'm from," she said at last, "we've got a flower kind of like that one. We call it sweet bloom. Smells gorgeous, better than this even, honestly. Whole hillsides of it back home, this soft pink color, and the smell carries for a mile." She paused. "Kills you in about a minute, though, if you breathe too deep standing in a patch of it. Stops your lungs. People die of it every year, walking through the wrong field at the wrong time, especially kids." She said all of this perfectly calmly. "My grandmother used to make a tea out of it." The room went silent again, but it was a different silence now. The brittle, uncertain silence of a room that isn't sure whether it has just been told a joke. "A tea," I repeated. "You boil it 3 times, Mara said, and she counted it off on her fingers, unhurried, the way you'd recite any recipe you'd known since childhood. 3. And you pour off the water completely between each boil. That part's not optional. You pour it all off, every drop. You don't even let it sit. By the 3rd boil, the bad part's gone, and what's left is just nice. Really nice, actually. Floral. A little bitter at the back end. My grandmother put honey in it." She smiled, and it was a small private smile, somewhere very far away, on a hillside on a world that had spent 1,000,000 years trying to kill her family and failing. "It killed my great-uncle, mind you. That same tea, but that was his own fault. He got lazy one night, only boiled it twice instead of 3 times, figured he'd get away with it." The smile turned wry. "He did not get away with it, so, you know, you've got to respect the flower." She looked back up at me, and the wryness faded into something steadier and older. "That's really all I'm saying, Professor. You've got to respect the flower, but respecting a thing and being scared of a thing, those aren't the same. They feel the same in your chest, but they're not the same, and the difference between them is more or less the whole reason my species is still alive. We figured that out a long, long time ago, where I'm from. We had to. And I, who had always, my entire life, had a response ready for everything a student could possibly say, I found that I had nothing at all to say to that. I went home that night and I could not stop thinking about it. You boil it 3 times. The casual, lethal, domestic horror of it. A child's grandmother, on a death world 100 light years away, standing in a kitchen, methodically and routinely defeating a poison that my entire careful civilization had spent centuries declaring undefeatable, and losing a relative to it now and again, and folding even that loss into the recipe, into the family lore, into the warning passed down the generations. Only boiled it twice, so you know, as though the death of her great-uncle were simply part of the instructions, a footnote, a seasoning. I had spent the whole of my life building walls between my fragile species and the things that could kill it. Glass, fields, distance, caution stacked upon caution, a lifetime of it, a civilization of it. And it had worked. It had kept us alive, kept the death toll to 41 over a span of decades, every one of them a tragedy I had personally mourned. I was proud of those walls. I had helped build many of them. But lying awake that night, I began for the first time to wonder what those walls had cost. Not in lives saved, I knew that figure. In the other direction. In everything we had never learned, never reached, never dared. We had looked at the dangers of the galaxy, my people, and we had said sensibly, wisely, stay away. And it had kept us alive. And it had kept us small, smaller and smaller with each passing century, our maps shrinking, our quarantine lists growing, our brave, careful scholars studying death only ever through glass, never once asking the question the humans apparently asked of everything that had ever tried to kill them. Yes, but how do I prepare it? I told myself she was exaggerating. The sweet bloom, the grandmother. Humans were storytellers. The very reports I'd dismissed had said as much. Surely no one actually stood in an actual kitchen and... The next afternoon, Mara came to class early. She was already sitting in the front row when I arrived, the front row which she had never once chosen before, and there was something on the desk in front of her. A small container. The plain, ordinary kind that a student might bring a packed lunch in. "Professor," she said, bright and pleasant as a spring morning, "I was hoping I could ask you about the Maw-Lily for a project." Every careful nerve in my careful old body lit up at once, all together, like a board full of alarms. "What sort of project?" I said. "Independent study," she smiled. "You're always telling us we should engage directly with the material, hands-on, first-hand. You said it just last week." She reached out and opened the small container, unhurried, and inside it, neatly arranged, clearly prepared in advance, clearly thought about, were 3 small empty glass vials, a folded square of cloth, and a set of implements miniaturized and precise that my mind first read as laboratory tools and then, with a slow and dawning horror, recognized for what they truly were. Cooking implements. Tiny, careful, surgical cooking implements. "I'd like to engage with the Maw-Lily," Mara said. "Directly, I just need access to a sample. A small one, honestly, a single petal would be plenty. I've done all the prep I can do without one." "Absolutely not," I said. The words came out of me on pure reflex, 61 years deep. "I've read every one of the 41 case files," she said gently, as though I hadn't spoken. "All of them, cover to cover. And do you know what not one of those 41 people ever tried, Professor? Not a single one of them in all those decades." She picked up one of the empty vials and held it up to the light. "Cooking it. Every one of them treated the Maw-Lily as a poison to be avoided, or contained, or studied through glass. Not one of them treated it as an ingredient to be prepared. And that's the whole difference. That's the entire difference between life and death. Right there. And 41 careful, brilliant people died standing inside it without ever once seeing it was there." And in the doorway behind her, Tev and Okonkwo had appeared out of breath, both of them, as though they'd run the length of the hall to get there. "Mara," Tev said, gripping the doorframe, "we talked about this. Last night you agreed." "You talked," Mara said mildly, still examining the vial. "I listened. Those are different things, Tev. We've been over that too." "Professor." Okonkwo, the older one, the quiet one, addressed me directly, and his deep voice carried a weary, genuine apology that was somehow more alarming than anything Mara had said. It was the voice of a man who had stood in this exact spot before, on more than one world, and knew precisely how the next hour was going to unfold. "I'd hear her out if I were you. And I want to be clear that I'm not saying that because she's right. I'm saying it because she is going to do this whether you help her or not. She has the sample handling certification. She could requisition a petal through 3 other departments by tomorrow afternoon if you refuse. And it goes considerably better for everyone when there's an actual professional supervising in the room instead of finding out afterward." He exhaled, long and slow. "She did this with the screamer fungus on Brask in her first term. The entire xenology faculty, there still won't return our messages. We would all very much prefer to not do the Brask version again." I looked at Mara, at the empty vials waiting to be filled, at the precise little cooking implements, at the calm, certain, entirely untroubled face of a creature whose homeworld had spent 1,000,000 years trying with everything it had to kill her species, and had succeeded only in teaching them, generation by generation, kitchen by kitchen, death by carefully recorded death, how to eat it. "You intend," I said slowly, and I heard my own voice come out thin and unfamiliar, "to cook the most lethal plant in the known galaxy, and then you intend to eat it." "I intend to find out whether I can," Mara corrected gently. "That's different, and the difference matters. Respectfully, carefully." With proper preparation and proper supervision and every safety measure you want to insist on, I'll agree to all of them, I promise. I'm not in any hurry and I'm not stupid." She reached into the container and took out the folded square of cloth and shook it open, and tied it around her neck with 2 quick practiced movements, and my mind lurched as I understood, with a fresh wave of vertigo, that it was a napkin. "And you're more than welcome to supervise. In fact, Professor, I'd genuinely love it if you would. I mean that. There is no one alive who knows this plant better than you do. 61 years, 41 case files, the whole collection. Who in the entire galaxy could possibly be better than you at making absolutely certain that I do this right?" And there it was. The trap, beautifully laid with no malice in it whatsoever, which is what made it inescapable. She was not daring me. She was not mocking my caution. She was honoring it. She was telling me truthfully that my lifetime of fear was the very thing that could keep her alive, if only I would point it forward instead of backward for once. Every cautious instinct of my entire cautious life told me to refuse, to call security, to seal the Maw-Lily in the deepest vault on the most peaceful world in the galaxy, and never speak of any of this to anyone, ever again. Instead, God's help me. God's help my whole careful, frightened, glass-loving species, I heard myself say. A single petal, one, and you will do exactly as I say in exactly the order I say it, exactly. Do you understand me?" Mara grinned. It was, without any competition at all, the single most alarming thing I had ever seen in 61 years among the deadliest plants in the galaxy. "Pull up a chair, Professor," she said, settling the napkin at her collar. "And could somebody pass the seasoning? I did not sleep the night before. I want to be honest about my own cowardice here, because it matters to the story. I had agreed to supervise Mara's. I didn't even have a word for it. Experiment was too clean. Meal was insane. I lay awake in my quarters running the numbers on the Maw-Lily over and over, the way you press a sore tooth, and every time I came back to the same place. 41 deaths, no antitoxin, no treatment, a toxin so stable that heat and acid and time itself couldn't break it. Everything science knew said that what Mara intended to do would kill her in under 10 seconds, and would very likely kill me too, standing next to her, and possibly empty the whole xenobotanical hall if the containment slipped even once. And yet, you boil it 3 times, I couldn't stop hearing it, the casualness of it, the grandmother, the honey. A whole death world full of people who turned the universe's poisons into Tuesday dinner, losing one of their own here and there, and folding the loss into the recipe and continuing. I had built my life on the proposition that the Maw-Lily could not be defeated. I am ashamed to tell you that what kept me awake was not only fear that Mara was wrong. It was the small, traitorous scholar's fear that she might be right, and that I'd been afraid of a flower my whole life for nothing. We did it in the morning in the secure preparation lab off the main hall, the most controlled environment on the planet, ringed with containment fields, scrubbed air, the works. I insisted on that much. I insisted on a great many things. Mara agreed to all of them without complaint, which unsettled me more than if she'd argued, because it told me she'd done this enough times to know that the careful people always need their rituals, and that it costs nothing to let them have them. There were 5 of us in the room, myself, Mara, Tev and Okonkwo, her 2 human companions who had given up trying to stop her and now simply stood by, Tev tense and pale, Okonkwo calm in the way of a man who has accepted that the sun rises and Mara eats things. And one other, a colleague of mine, Dr. Reshvai, a brilliant and even more cautious xenotoxicologist whom I'd asked to attend, partly for her expertise and partly, I admit, so I wouldn't be the only Silanti in the room when it went wrong. Reshvai had argued with me for an hour the night before. "You'll lose your post," she'd said. "You'll lose your reputation. You may lose your life." For what? To indulge a death world child's death wish. "To see," I'd told her, It was the only honest answer I had. She came anyway. Scholars are all the same underneath. I brought out a single petal of the Maw-Lily. One, pale and luminous and soft, no longer than my smallest finger, and the moment the case opened the scrubbers screamed up to full power, and the scent alarms began their slow warning pulse, and every cautious bone in my body told me to seal it again and run. Mara just leaned in and looked at it with that wondering look, and then she looked at it with a cook's look, which I was learning to tell apart, and she nodded to herself like a craftsman sizing up a difficult material. "Okay," she said. "Talk me through it, Professor. Everything you know about the toxin, where it concentrates, what triggers the scent release, how it binds, all of it. You're the expert. I'm not going to insult you by pretending I don't need you." And here is the thing I did not expect, the thing that more than anything changed how I saw all of this. She listened, completely. For 2 hours I told her everything I knew about the Maw-Lily, every property, every cruel elegance of its chemistry, every one of the 41 deaths, and exactly how each one had happened. And Mara absorbed it like dry soil absorbs water. She asked questions that were sharper than any I'd been asked in decades. She made me realize out loud things about the plant I'd known for 40 years and never quite articulated, that the toxin concentrated at the petal's base, that the scent release triggered on tissue damage, that the compound, stable as it was against heat, had one quirk I'd always noted and never thought important. It bound weakly to certain fats, lipids. It would rather be in oil than in water. I'd recorded that fact in a paper 60 years ago, and no one, including me, had ever once cared. Mara's eyes lit up when I said it. "There it is," she said softly. "There's the weakness, there's the door." "That is not a weakness," I said. "It is a binding preference. It changes nothing. The toxin is still." "Professor," she held up a hand, gentle. "Where I'm from we have a saying about the death world, everything wants to be somewhere. You just told me this poison would rather be in fat than in water. That's not nothing. That's everything. That's the whole game." She was already reaching for her implements. "You don't fight a poison that won't break. You give it somewhere else it would rather be, and then you take that away from the food." She looked up at me, and for the first time I saw not the restless student but something older underneath, something her whole species carried, I think, a thing learned over 1,000,000 years of kitchens on a world that wanted them dead. My grandmother couldn't have told you the chemistry. But she knew you boil the sweet bloom 3 times and pour off the water, and she knew you fry it in oil at the end and pour that off too. She didn't know why. You just told me why. 60 years you've had this fact and you thought it was nothing. She smiled. "It's the door, Professor. It was always the door. You just never tried the handle because you were too busy being afraid of the room." I won't pretend I understood everything she did over the next hour. I am a botanist, not a cook, and it turned out those were more different than I had ever imagined, and also more alike. She broke the petal down, carefully, behind the field in a sealed vessel, releasing the scent in a controlled burn rather than letting it aerosolize. She heated it and cooled it and heated it again. She introduced reagents I half recognized as kitchen things and half recognized as laboratory things and slowly understood were both. That the line I'd drawn between a lab and a kitchen was a line my species had invented and hers had never bothered with. She drew the toxin toward fats, the way I'd told her it wanted to go, into a small amount of oil, and then she discarded the oil carefully into a containment vessel, drawing the poison out of the tissue and into a thing she could throw away. She washed what remained. She tasted nothing yet. She wasn't reckless, whatever it looked like from outside. She tested. She had brought instruments, real ones, and she measured the toxin levels at each stage. And she showed me the readings, and I watched, not quite believing, as the number that meant certain death fell and fell and fell. Reshvi watched the readings too. At some point she stopped looking horrified and started looking the way I felt, which was furious in a way that had nothing to do with anger. The fury of a lifetime of caution looking at a problem it could have solved decades ago if it had only, once, been brave enough to be curious instead of afraid. It's not possible, Reshvi murmured, watching the toxin reading drop below the lethal threshold. We tried. For centuries we tried to neutralize it. You tried to destroy it, Okonkwo said quietly from his corner. It was nearly the only thing he'd said all morning. Mara's not destroying it, she's relocating it. There's a difference, and your people never found it because your people don't cook. He said it without judgment, just an old true thing. On our world, the ones who didn't learn to cook didn't have grandchildren, so all of us are descended from the ones who learned. It's in us now. It's not bravery exactly. It's just what we are. By the end of the hour, the small portion of prepared Maw-Lily tissue on Mara's plate read, by Reshvi's own instruments, checked 3 times as inert. Non-lethal. The single most dangerous plant in the catalogued galaxy, rendered as harmless as a boiled root, sitting on a plate in a teaching lab on Silun. I did not believe the readings. I want to be clear. My intellect accepted them, and something deeper, 61 years deep, refused. Mara looked at the plate. Then she looked at me and Reshvi and her 2 friends. And she picked up a small implement and cut a piece and lifted it, and I felt the whole room stop breathing. Even Okonkwo, even calm Okonkwo, leaned forward half an inch. And Mara paused, the piece halfway to her mouth. "You know what it's missing," she said. "What?" I whispered. She set the implement down. She looked at me with perfect, mischievous calm. "Seasoning," she said. "It's bland, all that work, and it's just bland." She glanced around the lab. "Professor, do you have anything in here? Salt, an acid, anything? You can't eat the most dangerous plant in the galaxy and have it taste like nothing. That'd be the real tragedy." And Reshvi, the most cautious being I have ever known, who had argued with me for an hour, who had come expecting to watch a child die. Reshvi reached into her own coat, with a hand that was not quite steady, and produced a small vial of the mineral salts our species uses to flavor food, and held it out across the lab. "Here," she said faintly. Mara took it. "Thank you," she said warmly, like it was the most normal thing in the world. She seasoned the piece. She lifted it again. "Pass the seasoning," Tev said under his breath, somewhere between despair and helpless love. "She's going to put it on her gravestone." And Mara ate the Maw-Lily. I have tried many times to describe the next 30 seconds, and I always fail because nothing happened, and the nothing was the most enormous thing I have ever witnessed. She chewed, she swallowed, she tilted her head considering the way you consider any new dish. The scent alarms did not sound, the toxin readings did not spike, her body did not begin its 10-second journey into death. She simply ate, and the most lethal plant in the galaxy went down like food, because she had spent an hour making it into food, because somewhere on a death world, 100 light years away, her grandmother had taught her that there is no such thing as a poison, only an ingredient you haven't learned to prepare yet. "Huh," Mara said after a moment. "Not bad, bit like a bitter green. The base of the petals better than the tip. You were right about the concentration, Professor. The flavor follows the toxin, that's interesting." She cut another piece, seasoned it, ate it, entirely at ease. "Could use a fat to round it out, some oil. But you can't use just any oil, obviously, because of the binding thing. You'd pull the—" "Mara," I said, my voice came out strange. She looked up. "Professor." I was sitting down, I realized. I didn't remember sitting down. 61 years of certainty had gone out of me all at once and left me lightheaded. "You ate it," I said. "I prepared it," she corrected gently. "And then I ate it. The preparing's the part that matters. Anybody can eat. Eating's easy." She set down her implement. And something in her softened, because I think she saw, finally, what this was doing to me, that it wasn't a stunt to me, that she'd reached into the foundation of my whole life and rearranged it in an hour. "Professor, I'm sorry. I know what this looks like from your side. I do. You spent your whole life learning to be afraid of this thing, and you were right to be. It's killed 41 people. It'll kill the 42nd tomorrow if they're careless. I'm not saying the fear was wrong. She leaned forward. I'm saying the fear was the first step, not the last one. Where I'm from, fear's how you find out something's worth understanding. You get scared of a thing and then you get curious about the thing you're scared of, and then, if you're careful, if you're humble, if you respect it, you learn to live with it. Sometimes you even learn to make tea. She smiled. You stopped at the fear, Professor. Your whole beautiful, careful civilization stopped at the fear. That's the only difference between us. We just kept going. And Reshvi, beside me, said something I will never forget. She was staring at the empty plate, at the impossible empty plate, and she said, very quietly, "How many others?" Mara looked at her. "What?" "How many others?" Reshvi said. "Of the 40,000 specimens in this hall, the ones we've kept behind glass for centuries, the ones we've called undefeatable, how many of them are just ingredients we never learned to prepare?" The lab was very quiet. "Oh," said Mara, and her eyes went wide and bright and hungry, and I felt a fresh wave of pure terror because I knew that look now. I knew exactly what it meant. "Oh, doctor, now that's a good question. That's a really good question." She was already untying her napkin, already standing, already looking toward the doors of the great hall and the 40,000 deadly things behind their glass. "Why don't we go find out?" I should tell you what I expected to happen next, because it is so far from what actually happened that the gap between them is, in a way, the whole point of this story. I expected to quietly bury the incident. That's the truth. I am a cautious creature from a cautious species, and my instinct, after watching Mara eat the Maw-Lily and survive, was to seal the prep lab, swear everyone to silence, return the petal to its vault, and spend the rest of my career pretending it had never happened. Because if it had happened, if the most lethal plant in the galaxy was simply an ingredient we'd been too frightened to learn, then everything I'd built my life on was, if not wrong, then terribly, embarrassingly incomplete. And no scholar wants to face that at 61. I went to seal the lab. Reshvi stopped me, with a hand on my arm and a look I'd never seen on her cautious face. "No," she said. "Orsh, no, we don't bury this." She gestured at the empty plate, at Mara, at the great hall beyond with its 40,000 glass cases. "Do you understand what we just watched? We have spent centuries, our whole civilization, the careful and the brilliant, the best minds Silun ever grew, building walls between ourselves and the galaxy's dangers, and it kept us alive, and it kept us small. And a Death World child just walked in and showed us in one morning that half those walls were never necessary. That behind half that glass is not death, it's dinner." Her large eyes were wet. "How many of our students died over the centuries doing field research on plants they were taught to only ever fear? How much did we never learn because we stopped at the fear? Orsh, we don't bury this, we teach it." And that is how the strangest course in the history of the Academy on Silun came to be. We called it comparative preparation. The faculty board fought it, of course. A roomful of cautious Silunti scholars does not approve a course about cooking the things that kill you without a great deal of argument. But Reshvi presented the data. The toxin readings before and after. The instruments checked and rechecked. And then, when the data wasn't enough, because data rarely moves the truly frightened, she did something braver. She brought in a sealed, prepared sample of Maw-Lily, rendered inert by Mara's method, and she ate it there, in front of the entire faculty board. The most cautious institution on the most cautious world in the galaxy watched a xenotoxicologist eat the plant that had killed 41 of their colleagues, and not die. The course was approved by the end of the week. Mara taught it. Of course she did. A first-year student, suddenly co-instructing a course alongside the two foremost botanists on the planet, and she was good at it, patient, careful, endlessly respectful of the danger even as she dismantled it. She never once let a student be cavalier. That was the thing the reports about humans always got wrong, the thing I'd gotten wrong myself at first. It looked like recklessness from outside. It was the opposite. It was the most profound respect for danger I had ever encountered, a respect so complete that it refused to stop at being afraid, because being afraid, Mara said, is just a way of letting the danger win without a fight. Fear says stay away, she told the first class, holding up a thorn fruit that had blinded a dozen researchers. Respect says come closer carefully. They feel the same in your body. They are not the same thing. Your people built a civilization on fear and called it caution. We built one on respect and called it dinner. Today I'm going to teach you the difference, and I'm going to teach you so carefully that not one of you gets hurt, because the first rule, the only rule that matters, is that you respect the thing enough to never, ever rush it. She set the thorn fruit down. My great-uncle rushed the sweet bloom, only boiled it twice. We don't rush. Rushing is how the danger wins. Patience is how you eat the galaxy. I have to tell you about the day the galactic survey came, because that's the part that turned a strange classroom incident into something that changed the sector. Word had spread, you see. It always does. A year after Mara ate the Maw-Lily, the xenobotanical hall at Saloon was no longer a museum of things to fear. It was a working kitchen laboratory where students from 40 worlds learned to render the galaxy's deadliest flora safe, and not just safe, but useful, nourishing. We discovered in that year that some of the most lethal plants in the catalog, once their toxins were relocated and discarded, were among the most nutritious substances known, packed with compounds no safe plant produced. The death world logic held. A thing does not evolve to be that deadly unless it is protecting something valuable. The poison was a lock, and the humans had taught us finally that locks have keys, and that you do not have to burn down the house to find them. The Galactic Survey sent a delegation to investigate the reports. A formal one, 3 high officials of the survey's xenobiological division, the body that catalogued danger for the entire sector, that published the lists of worlds too lethal to settle, plants too deadly to study, regions to be quarantined and abandoned. They had built their authority, much as I had built mine, on a foundation of stay away. And they came to Saloon skeptical, even hostile, because we were undermining centuries of their careful, fearful work. The lead official was a being called Administrator Vole, a creature of enormous dignity and even more enormous caution, from a species nearly as careful as my own. He watched a class. He watched students render a screamer fungus inert and eat it on toast. He watched, stone-faced, as the foundations of his life's work were quietly, respectfully dismantled in front of him by a roomful of cheerful young people from a dozen worlds. And at the end he turned to Mara and he said coldly, the way a frightened powerful creature speaks when its power is threatened, "This is irresponsible. You are teaching the young that danger is not dangerous. People will die. The galaxy is full of things that kill, and you are teaching children to put them in their mouths." The room tensed. The students looked at Mara. And Mara, I was so proud of her in that moment. I cannot tell you, Mara did not get angry. She walked over to a sealed case, and she took out a single petal of the Maw-Lily, raw, unprepared, lethal. And she held it up so the whole room could see it. And the scrubbers screamed and the alarms began their slow pulse. And every careful creature in that room flinched back from it, including me, including Administrator Vole, who went gray and took 2 full steps toward the door. "You're right," Mara said quietly into the alarm. "This kills in seconds. The administrator is exactly right, and I want every one of you to look at how he just moved, how I moved, how the professor moved. Look at how fast our bodies got us away from this, because our bodies are smart, and this thing is death." She held it a moment longer, letting them feel it. Then she sealed it back in its case, and the alarms went quiet and the room breathed. "Fear is not the enemy," she said. "Fear is the teacher. Fear is the first thing this petal ever taught anyone, and it's a true thing, and you should never unlearn it. Administrator Vole is not wrong to be afraid. He's wise to be afraid." She looked around the room. "But where I'm from, we learned something the galaxy never had to. When the whole world is trying to kill you, stay away isn't a survival strategy. It's just a slower death. You run out of places to stay away from. So we had a choice: die afraid or get curious. And we got curious, and here we are. She turned back to Vole. I'm not teaching these kids that danger isn't dangerous, administrator. I'm teaching them that dangerous and impossible are different words, and that your whole catalog confused them for centuries. And people died of that confusion too, not from eating the plants, but from never being allowed to learn that they could. How many worlds did your survey quarantine and abandon? How many places did entire peoples flee because the catalog said too deadly to live here, when the truth was just too deadly to live here carelessly? Fear closed those worlds. Respect could have opened them. She let that sit. You don't have to like what we do, but I'd ask you before you call it irresponsible, which is more irresponsible, to teach the young to prepare the danger, or to teach them only to run from it and call that wisdom, and watch the galaxy shrink around them, one quarantined world at a time, forever. Administrator Vole did not answer for a long time. Then he walked to the sealed case. He looked at the Maw-Lily petal behind the glass for a long, long moment, the most cautious creature in the room, looking at the most dangerous thing in the galaxy. And he said, without turning around, in a voice gone quiet and uncertain, and for the first time young, "Could you teach me to prepare it properly, carefully, with the respect it deserves?" And Mara smiled, the gentle smile this time, not the alarming one, and she said, "Pull up a chair, administrator, and could somebody pass the seasoning?" That was 4 years ago. The Galactic Survey doesn't publish a quarantine list anymore. They publish a preparation index, a sector-wide archive, growing every month, of how to live safely alongside the galaxy's dangers instead of fleeing them. 3 abandoned worlds have been resettled. 2 famines, on worlds whose only abundant plants had been deemed too toxic to eat, have ended, because someone finally taught the people there to relocate the poison and keep the food. The death world logic spread across a sector that had spent its whole history running away. Mara graduated. She could have done anything. She went back out to the dangerous worlds, the quarantined ones, the ones the catalog had closed, with a team of students from 40 species, to open them back up one careful recipe at a time. She sends me readings sometimes, new plants, new doors, new things that the galaxy called death and she calls dinner. I keep every message. I am very old now. I still run the hall, though Reshvi does most of the real work and the students do the rest. It is not a quiet museum of fear anymore. It is loud and it smells of cooking, and now and then an alarm goes off and everyone moves fast and careful and respectful, the way Mara taught them, the way her grandmother taught her, the way a death world taught a whole species across 1,000,000 years of kitchens. No one has died in my hall since the day Mara ate the Maw-Lily. Not one. We are more careful now than we ever were when we were only afraid. That is the part the catalog never understood. Respect is more careful than fear. Fear just runs. Respect stays and pays attention and learns. People come to visit sometimes. Young scholars from cautious worlds who heard the story and don't quite believe it. They stand in front of the Maw-Lily case. We keep one petal raw always behind the glass, with the alarm still armed, and they ask me if it's true. They ask me what the human really was. What made her brave enough to eat the thing that kills in seconds? And I tell them the truth, that it took me 61 years and one death world child to learn. She wasn't brave, not the way we mean it. She was humble. That's the secret nobody expects. She looked at the most dangerous thing in the galaxy and she didn't think she was stronger than it. She knew she wasn't. She respected it more than any of us ever had. She just refused to believe that dangerous meant the end of the conversation. She thought it meant the conversation was only getting started. And she was patient enough and careful enough and humble enough to have that conversation all the way to the end. We stopped at "this plant kills in seconds." We thought that was the whole truth. We built a civilization on it. She heard the same sentence we did. And then, very quietly, with a napkin around her neck and her grandmother's voice somewhere behind her own, She said the 4 words that changed a sector. Pass the seasoning. And the galaxy got bigger.